Hi, I'm Scott Alberts, class of 94-95. I'm the outgoing president of the Alumni Association, and this is the first of 3 short videos to introduce you to the Alumni Association, our structure and history, and welcome you to the Alumni Leadership Council. We moved this part of orientation online during the pandemic, but it seems to work well as videos. If you do have questions, please be sure to write them down and bring them so that we can talk about them when we see you in person, whether that's live in person or on Zoom. The goal of this video is just for you to learn a little bit about why you're here and why we do what we do. Not because what we do is perfect, but because we want you to help us as we evolve and try to make things better. This talk was first developed in conjunction with Danielle Young, the former Assistant Vice President and Executive Director. When she left a couple of years ago, I kind of inherited it, and I made it a little bit sillier because that's what I do. Let's start with a couple of definitions first. The first one is about the Alumni Association. An alum is anyone who previously attended Oberlin College. A graduate is maybe more obvious because that's someone who was granted an academic degree. We sometimes use those terms interchangeably, but that's totally not the case. In fact, for our association, most everything we do is open to all alumni, with the only exception being that alumni elected trustees only allow graduates to actually cast a ballot in that vote. Current students are also not alumni, but they will automatically become alumni when they leave Oberlin with or without a degree in hand. Of course, we also use the term OB as a more general term, which includes all of us, but also the faculty, the staff, parents, those who love Oberlin, including some who may have never even set foot on the campus. Of course, we're also an association, so we're a group of former students who have come together to try to work together. The Alumni Leadership Council is us, a group of 20-some alum who help organize and coordinate the association. We think about the groups large and small. Besides our own alumni association, we have about 50,000 living alumni if you count everyone, including about 40,000 who are graduates at least a couple years ago. We also think our subgroups are their own associations, part of us, but also their own entities. For instance, OA to the 4th is the Alumni Association of African Ancestry, which is an affiliate group, but is also an association of its own. We also think about groups like the Heisman Club, which are not formally affiliated with us, focuses on athletics, but of course we do like to stay connected with them. Our association is distinguished from the Alumni Relations and Annual Giving Office. Our office has had multiple names in recent years, but that's the current name. We are not the office and they are not us, but we work together to get things done. Terry Kurtz is our still new Assistant Vice President. He started just about a year ago. Because of the pandemic, I've had many meetings with him and I've worked, but I've never actually met him in person. He's been doing great, but I look forward to meeting him at our meetings here in 2021. There are then 4 directors who report to him, including 2 brand new directors and up to 14 total staff when the office is fully staffed. I don't actually think we've ever been fully staffed since I've been paying attention, and we certainly haven't been for quite a while. The 4 offices include alumni engagement, which is typically what the Alumni Leadership Council does. Emily Cole is the Director of Alumni Engagement, so we work with her a lot. Reunions and class giving and volunteer engagement and strategic partnerships are 2 new offices, or 2 new divisions, 2 new areas, with 2 new directors coming on board. I hope we'll get to meet them at the meeting here in 2021. Of course, the pandemic really messed with these roles, and so having vacancies in them have allowed them to be restructured. And we're hoping that the new structure will help us move forward past the pandemic into some new and interesting areas. The 4th area is annual and individual giving. And even though the ALC is not specifically about fundraising, we know that the college counts on us to be a partner in this. We are specifically tasked with working with the All In for Oberlin activity in April, and many alumni help with fundraising through a variety of different activities and events. This next slide shows the office staff. Terry, I mentioned, Emily's the Director of Alumni Engagement. Kyle Youngblood is the Assistant Director of Engagement. Jill Robinson and Brian Brown are brand new. Again, I hope we'll get to meet them next week. Lisa Thur is the Director of Annual and Individual Giving. David Stonebroker Martinez also works in that office, and there's a vacant position there. I do want to make sure not to skip our administrative assistants, Kim, Deb, Tina, and Shannon, who do tons of great work. Probably many of you have had a chance to work with them before, and we know that their work is invaluable to getting all the things done. If you think about the reunion we have, again, in a non-pandemic year where you have 4,000 people coming back to do 200 activities, those folks work overtime to get things done. Finally, here's an organization chart, which has the same information. I wasn't going to include it, but Terry worked hard to get me an updated one, so I wanted to make sure to show off his good new org chart. I want to take a minute to talk about the idea of how the office and the association work together. One thing that I often get asked is, who's really in charge? Who's the boss of this engagement, of this endeavor? And I want to say that I don't think that's a useful discussion at all, and I really don't think it's helpful to spend much time talking about it. In general, we all want the best decisions to be made. We want to do what we can. We want to be good stewards of the money that we spend. We want to take care of things, and we want to make sure that Oberlin is around for years and years and years and years to come. We want to make sure that all of us are talking and communicating with everyone as much as we can. We want to make sure those who are impacted by the decisions, stakeholders, are part of the decision-making process. Certainly, the college is the formal entity. They handle our finances, and we handle our own structure. The office does most of the work. Too much work, if you ask me. I think we alumni could do a little bit more to help get things done. As president of the association, I don't work for Terry. I was elected by the ALC. I wasn't appointed by President Ambar, the Vice President for Advancement. And the same goes for all of you. You're here because we alumni think that you alumni can help us all be better alumni, better connected to the college and better connected to each other. But it's also true that Terry, Emily, and the rest of the team don't work for us. They work for the college. That's who pays their salary. And we need to work together in order to get things done. You'll hear when I go to the history part in the second video that historically, the association was a separate nonprofit corporation, a charity. We merged quite a few years ago, but we still have a feel of that sense of autonomy and independence. Of course, being OBs, we have more of that maybe than we should. Back in the 1980s, lots of you remember that President Starr, who was president of Oberlin back then, really tried to change the college in a way that he thought would be good for the institution, but a lot of alumni didn't. In that case, having a strong association and a strong staff in the office was really important to help us protect the things that we thought were most important. Of course, today, I think we're more moving in the same direction, but that sense of autonomy while also having a sense of cooperation is something that I think is really important. As we get through the history, there will be a lot of dark and weird stories that we can talk about, maybe at the FEV with a cocktail and some tots between us. But I want to finish this part just with something my dad used to say, which is when you get into a pissing contest, what you end up with is a room full of piss, and none of us want that. I should mention that Danielle, when she was assistant vice president, did not write that and didn't think I should include that. And I have to say that I didn't ask Terry about that, so I must have some autonomy. The office is part of the broader division of advancement. Until a few years ago, it was called the Division of Development and Alumni Affairs. Mike Grzyziak is the vice president of that. He came in early 2020, so I did get to meet him in person one time before the pandemic, but I hope we'll get to see him when we're all there in person as well. Mike, if you're here watching this, I hope you know that my spell check now knows how to spell your name. At least I think I got it right this time. Advancement has a variety of offices within it, including alumni relations and annual giving. They really are focused on the long-term success of the college. Of course, a lot of that is fundraising, but a lot of it is also the kinds of programs that we're part of. We do tend to keep our friend-raising activities that we do separate from the fundraising, but we do want to remember that we're all in this together and all of the pieces have to work together to move forward. We, as an association, are not formally on that organization chart for advancement, but we are partners with them and we do have to work together for that. Again, we all win when we all work together, and when we fight, none of us win. Okay, the second video goes into the history of the Alumni Association, and the third video talks about some current issues. So when you're ready, go ahead and watch those videos. Thanks.